The morning Octavia Reeves walked into the Crestwood Medical Center. She was not looking for a fight. She was looking for answers. She had been waiting 3 weeks for this appointment. 3 weeks of waking up at 2 in the morning, with her left side burning like someone had pressed a hot iron against her ribs. 3 weeks of her daughter, Lena, calling every other day, asking if she'd heard back from the doctor's office yet. 3 weeks of telling herself it was probably nothing, probably just stress, probably just the way her body had started talking back to her now that she was 61, and her joints remembered every winter she'd ever lived through in Cleveland. The lobby of Crestwood was the kind of clean that felt aggressive. The floors reflected the overhead lights like still water. There was a waterfall feature near the reception desk, one of those walls where water ran down sheets of frosted glass, and it made a sound like shushing, like the whole building was asking everyone in it to be quiet and wait their turn. Octavia checked in at the front desk, gave her insurance card, and sat down in one of the grey chairs near the window. She had worn her good coat, the charcoal one with the buttons she'd bought for Lena's college graduation 8 years ago. She had pressed her slacks the night before. She had written her symptoms down on a notepad so she wouldn't forget anything when the time came. She had done everything right. Dr. Philip Hartwell came into the examination room 17 minutes after the nurse had taken Octavia's blood pressure and told her someone would be with her shortly. He was a tall man, somewhere in his mid-50s, with silver hair swept back from a wide forehead and the kind of posture that suggested he had been told many times in his life that he was important. Home. He walked in reading something on his tablet, and he did not look up when he entered. "Mrs. Reeves," he said, still looking at the screen. "Miss Reeves," she said, "or Octavia is fine." He glanced up briefly, then back down. "Right. So, what brings you in today?" It was not a question the way he said it. It was a formality. The same way someone might say have a nice day when they were already looking at the person behind you. Octavia took a breath. She opened her notepad. "I've been having pain on my left side, just below my ribs, for about 3 weeks now. It's worse at night. I also noticed some fatigue that's different from my usual tired. It's more like a heaviness. And I've had some changes in my digestion that started around the same time." Hartwell set the tablet down on the counter and folded his arms. He looked at her then. The way someone looks at a piece of furniture they're not sure they want to move. "How much coffee are you drinking?" he said. Octavia blinked. "I'm sorry. Or alcohol." "Do you drink?" "A cup of coffee in the morning." "I don't drink alcohol." "Uh-huh." He typed something. "And your diet? How would you describe it?" "I eat well. Vegetables, lean proteins. I cook most of my meals at home." He made a sound that was not quite agreement. He pressed on her abdomen briefly, asked her to breathe in, then stepped back like he'd confirmed what he already suspected. "I think what you're experiencing is likely stress-related," he said. "Acid reflux can present in unusual ways, particularly in—" He paused in a way that did not feel accidental. "In patients who are under lifestyle stress." "Lifestyle stress," Octavia repeated. "Diet, sleep patterns, anxiety. It's very common." He was already moving toward the door. "I'm going to recommend you try an over-the-counter antacid for 4 weeks and keep a food journal. We can follow up after that if things haven't improved." Octavia did not move. "Dr. Hartwell, I've had acid reflux before. This isn't that. The pain is consistent and it's localized. I'd like to request an imaging scan." He stopped. He turned around slowly, and when he looked at her this time it was different. There was something in his expression that had shifted, some small recalibration, like a person who has been only half paying attention and is now choosing to pay less. "Mrs. Reeves," he said, "I've been practicing medicine for 26 years. I understand that. An imaging scan is a significant resource. We don't just order them because a patient has a hunch." "It's not a hunch," she said. "It's 3 weeks of documented symptoms. I have them written down here." She held up the notepad. He looked at the notepad the way people look at something a child has drawn and then held up for approval. "I appreciate that you've been thorough," he said, and the word thorough landed the way a pat on the head lands. "But I think you're letting anxiety drive this visit more than actual clinical indicators. Some patients, and there's no shame in this, some patients come in expecting a particular diagnosis, and they start to organize their symptoms around that expectation. It's called symptom anchoring. It's very common." Octavia set the notepad down on her knee. She looked at him with the kind of quiet that takes years to develop. Not the quiet of someone who has nothing to say. The quiet of someone deciding exactly how much to say and when. "Are you telling me," she said, "that I don't know what's happening in my own body? I'm telling you that I'm the one with the medical degree in this room." He said it without blinking. He said it the way someone says something they've said before, in other rooms, to other people, and nothing bad has ever happened to them afterward. He opened the door. "The front desk will give you a pamphlet on acid reflux management. If symptoms persist after 4 weeks, call the scheduling line and we'll get you back in." And then he was gone. Just like that. The door didn't even close all the way behind him. Octavia sat in the examination room for a moment. The paper cover on the table crinkled when she shifted her weight. Outside the door, she could hear the ordinary sounds of the clinic, a phone ringing somewhere, a cart being wheeled across linoleum, someone laughing at the nurse's station. She put her notepad back in her purse. She buttoned her good coat. She walked out. She did not get a pamphlet from the front desk. What Dr. Philip Hartwell did not know. What he had no reason to know because he had not asked, because asking would have required the kind of curiosity about other people that he had stopped exercising sometime around his 3rd year of residency, was who Octavia Reeves was outside of that examination room. He did not know that she had spent the last 11 years as the executive director of the Midwestern Healthcare Accountability Board, a state-chartered oversight body with the authority to investigate patient care complaints, initiate peer reviews, and recommend the suspension or revocation of medical licenses in the state of Ohio. He did not know that she had, in that capacity, overseen the formal review of 43 physicians. That 17 of those reviews had resulted in disciplinary action. That 4 had ended careers. He did not know any of this because he had looked at a 61-year-old black woman sitting in his examination room, in a charcoal coat, with a notepad on her knee, and he had decided, in the way that some people decide things without knowing they're deciding anything, that she did not need to be taken seriously. He would come to understand this distinction later. By then, it would be too late for it to help him. Octavia did not file a complaint that afternoon. She was not a person who acted from anger, or at least not only from anger. She understood that anger by itself was just weather. It moved through you, it changed the temperature, but it didn't build anything. What built things was method. She went home. She called her primary care physician in Cincinnati. She had not yet transferred her records since her move to Columbus 8 months ago, which was why she'd needed a referral to Crestwood in the first place, and described her symptoms in full. Her doctor, a woman named Dr. Adeyemi who had known Octavia for 12 years, listened for 4 minutes without interrupting and then said, "Octavia, I want you to get an abdominal ultrasound and a liver panel, today if possible." "Can you go to a walk-in imaging center?" "Yes," Octavia said. "Do it, today," Dr. Adeyemi said. She went that afternoon. The imaging center was small and a little scuffed around the edges, the kind of place that didn't have a waterfall wall and didn't pretend to. The technician was a young man named Russell, who told her to breathe normally and did his job without commentary. The results were transmitted to Dr. Adeyemi within 2 hours. Dr. Adeyemi called that evening. Her voice was careful in the way that careful voices are when they are carrying something heavy. There was a mass, left lobe of the liver, approximately 3 centimeters. Not definitive yet. She would need a biopsy and an oncology consult, further imaging, but it was there, and it had been there long enough that it would have shown up had anyone thought to look. Octavia sat at her kitchen table after the call and looked at the bowl of fruit on the counter for a long time. The bananas had started to spot. She had been meaning to make bread with them. She thought about Dr. Hartwell saying lifestyle stress. She thought about him saying symptom anchoring. She thought about the door that didn't close all the way behind him. Then she opened her laptop, and she got to work. The formal complaint process was something Octavia had administered from the other side of the desk. For over a decade, she knew its architecture the way a builder knows a house they've constructed with their own hands. Where the load-bearing walls were. Which parts were solid. Which parts were merely decorative. She knew exactly what documentation was required, how specificity of language affected outcomes, what reviewers looked for when they were deciding whether something rose to the level of actionable professional misconduct. She was, it turned out, a very effective complainant. She documented the encounter in full. She transcribed the conversation from memory while it was still fresh, noting specific phrases, the sequence of events, the absence of any clinical examination, Beyond a brief abdominal palpation, the recommendation for over-the-counter treatment in the absence of any diagnostic testing, she attached the imaging results and the liver panel. She included a letter from Dr. Adeyemi describing the clinical picture and her own assessment that imaging had been clinically indicated based on the patient's reported symptoms. She submitted the complaint to the Ohio State Medical Board. She also, and this was the part that Dr. Hartwell would not see coming, submitted a parallel notification to the Midwestern Healthcare Accountability Board, to herself, technically, to her own office. She recused herself from any direct role in the review because she was the patient and because she still believed in the process she'd spent 11 years building. She handed it to her deputy, a methodical and uncompromising woman named Florence Park, and told her to treat it like any other case. Florence Park treated everything like it was any other case. That was why Octavia had hired her. 3 weeks passed. During those 3 weeks, Octavia got her biopsy, met with an oncologist named Dr. Coretta Barnes at the OSU Comprehensive Cancer Center, and learned that the mass was a hepatocellular carcinoma. Early stage, caught before it had spread, treatable with a combination of surgical resection and ablation therapy. Dr. Barnes was direct and thorough and looked at Octavia when she spoke. She asked about her family history and her lifestyle and her support system. She explained the treatment plan twice, in 2 different ways, to make sure it was clear. "You're lucky it was caught when it was," Dr. Barnes said. "I caught it myself," Octavia said. Dr. Barnes looked at her for a moment. "Good." During those same 3 weeks, the Ohio State Medical Board opened a formal investigation into Dr. Philip Hartwell. A separate inquiry was initiated by the Midwestern Healthcare Accountability Board. Hartwell received notification of both, along with a request to provide his clinical rationale for the decisions made during the October 14th appointment with patient Octavia Reeves. His attorney responded on his behalf initially. The response cited his 26 years of experience and characterized the encounter as a standard clinical visit in which the physician exercised appropriate professional judgment. The board requested his complete patient records for the preceding 3 years. Specifically, cases where imaging or diagnostic testing had been requested by a patient and denied, and cases involving patients over 55, and cases involving black women in particular. They were looking for a pattern. They usually found one when they looked this carefully. They found one. Dr. Philip Hartwell learned the full name of the woman in the charcoal coat on a Tuesday afternoon in November, when his attorney called him at 4:15 and told him to sit down. "The complainant," his attorney said slowly, "is Octavia Reeves, Executive Director of the Midwestern Healthcare Accountability Board." Hartwell was quiet for a moment. "The Oversight Board," his attorney continued. "The one that reviews physician licenses. I know what it is," Hartwell said. "She has submitted a complaint to both the State Medical Board and to her own office. She has recused herself from the internal review, which means this is being handled by her deputy, who has a reputation for being," there was a pause, "extremely thorough." Hartwell sat in his office on the 6th floor of Crestwood Medical Center and looked out the window at the parking lot below. The afternoon light was thin and flat, the way it gets in Ohio in November, when the sky goes the color of old dishwater and everything loses its edges. He thought about the woman in the examination room. The notepad. The quiet way she had looked him when he said what he said about the medical degree. He had not thought about her at all in the 3 weeks since. He saw 40, sometimes 50 patients a week. She had been, to him, unremarkable. He had moved through that appointment the way he moved through most of them. Efficiently, from the outside, and with a conclusion already forming before the door was fully open. He understood now what he had not understood then, that his efficiency had a shape to it, that the conclusions he formed before the door was fully open were not random, that they organized themselves around things he had never examined in himself, things he had no particular incentive to examine, because the consequences of not examining them had, always, until now, been invisible to him. He was beginning to see them now. "What are my options?" he said. His attorney's answer took a long time. The peer review process was not fast and it was not gentle. Hartwell's case was assigned to a 3-physician panel, and the panel requested an interview. His hospital administration placed him under an internal review as well. A quieter version of the same process, the kind of thing that happened behind closed doors, and was referred to in careful language as a temporary reassignment of caseload. while questions of clinical conduct were being resolved. His colleagues knew, of course. In a hospital, things always moved faster through the hallways than they did through official channels. By the end of the first week, the nurses at Crestwood, who had their own extensive and carefully maintained collective memory about which physicians listened to patients and which ones didn't, had heard the broad outlines of the story. Most of them were not surprised. Hartwell had always been the kind of doctor who confused authority with knowledge. The kind who spoke over patients, who treated a question as a challenge and a challenge as an impertinence. The nurses had learned which patients to check on after his appointments, who to ask quietly in the hallway whether they felt their concerns had been addressed, who to loop back to. Now someone outside the building had noticed, and the building was rearranging itself around the fact of being noticed. The review took 4 months. During those 4 months, Octavia completed her first surgical procedure and began the ablation treatment. She lost 12 pounds and gained them back. She walked every morning when she could manage it, 1.5 miles through her neighborhood, past the elementary school and the community garden and the coffee shop where they knew her order. She rested when she had to. She kept working, lighter than usual, letting Florence handle more of the day-to-day. Lena came to stay for 2 weeks in December and made soup and argued gently about whether Octavia was taking enough of the supplements doctor Barnes had recommended, and borrowed the charcoal coat one afternoon when she went out to run errands and came back wearing it like she'd always owned it. And Octavia sat at the kitchen table and felt something so full it didn't have a clean name. She was still here. That was the thing she kept coming back to. She had known her own body, and she had insisted, and she was still here. In March, the Ohio State Medical Board issued its findings. Dr. Philip Hartwell was found to have demonstrated a pattern of inadequate clinical assessment in a statistically significant subset of patients, specifically older, black female patients who presented with pain-related complaints and requested diagnostic testing. In 11 documented cases over 3 years, he had dismissed or deferred requests for imaging or referral without adequate clinical justification. In 3 of those cases, including Octavia's, delayed diagnosis had resulted in measurable patient harm. The board imposed a formal reprimand, mandatory retraining in implicit bias and patient communication, a 1-year supervised practice requirement, and a 6-month suspension. The Midwestern Healthcare Accountability Board issued a separate finding, noting that the case represented a systemic pattern rather than an isolated incident, and recommended that Crestwood Medical Center conduct a comprehensive audit of diagnostic referral patterns across demographic groups. The hospital agreed to the audit. Quietly, without admitting wrongdoing, they also restructured the patient advocacy process and hired 2 additional patient liaisons. It did not make the front page of anything. These things rarely do. They happen in the language of official findings and administrative memoranda, in the dense, careful prose of accountability documents that most people never read. But they happen. Hartwell's suspension began on a Monday in April. He drove to Crestwood to turn in his badge and clear out his office, which was a small formality that felt larger than it was. He carried a box of things to his car in the parking lot, where the afternoon light was thin and flat again, and he sat in the driver's seat for a while before he started the engine. He was not a man given to extended self-reflection. But he was sitting in a parking lot with 6 months of his career suspended and a formal reprimand attached to his name, and the space around him was quiet enough that certain thoughts had nowhere to go but forward. He thought about the notepad again, the charcoal coat. The way she had looked at him, not with anger exactly, but with something that had more patience in it than he deserved. He had told her he had a medical degree. He had said it like it was a wall, like it settled something. Like the 26 years he had spent inside the architecture of his own authority had made him more reliable than a woman's knowledge of her own body. He had been wrong in a way that was not small. He had been wrong in a way that had a shape and a history, and the shape was the outline of everyone he'd looked at and not seen, and the history was every appointment, where he had walked in with a conclusion already forming, and called it clinical judgment. He didn't know if that realization made him better or just aware. He didn't know if there was a difference. He started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot. Octavia heard about the suspension from Florence, who sent her a brief email with the subject line "findings attached" and the message "thought you'd want to see this. Take care of yourself." Florence was not a person who added unnecessary words to things. Octavia read the findings at her kitchen table, the same table where she had sat 4 months ago, looking at a bowl of spotting bananas after Dr. Adeyemi's phone call. The table had a coffee ring near the corner that she'd never gotten out despite several attempts. She noticed it sometimes, and then forgot about it again. She read through the full document carefully, the way she always read documents. She noted the specific findings, the recommended sanctions, the audit requirement for the hospital. She did not feel triumphant, exactly. Triumph suggested a competition, and she had not entered anything. She had walked into a doctor's office to find out why her body was hurting, and she had been turned away, and she had known herself well enough to go find someone who would actually look. The accountability process had done what it was designed to do. That was the system working. She'd spent 11 years trying to make the system work, and it felt different when you were the one it was working for. It felt like something you wanted to be able to believe in. She set the document down. Through the kitchen window, she could see the backyard, the early April light beginning to do what it does in Ohio, in spring. Tentative at first, like it isn't sure it's allowed. And then, all at once present, warming the concrete of the back steps, where her neighbor's cat liked to sit in the afternoon. She had a follow-up appointment with Dr. Barnes the following week. Her numbers had been trending in the right direction. Trending well was the phrase Dr. Barnes used, which was not a promise but was better than the alternative. She had a meeting in the afternoon about a new case, a cardiologist in Dayton, complaint from 3 different patients, referral patterns that didn't add up. Florence had already flagged it as one to watch. There was always another case. That was not a tragedy. That was the job. She got up to make coffee. She put the spotted bananas in a bowl on the counter to remind herself to make the bread this weekend. She had been meaning to do that for 4 months now, and she was still here, and she was going to make the bread.